calmness in tense conversations, the ability to resist impulsive reactions to attacks, and clarity in thinking. These are not innate gifts, but the result of a disciplined way of life, living like a Stoic. But how does one reach such a state when deep down we all have moments of turmoil just like anyone else? Let's trace that journey backward. It doesn't begin with strength, but with a small shift, learning to ask the right question. A single question, simple yet profound, combined with the right silence, can reveal truths that heated debates never could. Socrates never sought to win anyone over with words. He simply asked, patiently, curiously, and through his questions, the truth emerged from the other person themselves. This video will help you master 5 essential questions based on the Socratic method through the lens of Stoic philosophy, not just to debate better, but to live with greater clarity. So stay until the end of this journey. 1. Question 1. What would someone who disagrees say? Imagine you're standing on a high hill, quietly looking down at a wide field beneath your feet. Every detail seems clear, sunlight touching every blade of grass, every trail, making you believe you've seen the whole picture. But what you don't see is that on the other side of that same hill, someone else is also looking at the same field, from a completely different angle. From their vantage point, they can see a branch of the river you never knew existed, a shadow your eyes can't reach, a detail you thought wasn't there. And if both of you start arguing about what the field really looks like, without either being willing to cross over to the other side, then no matter how sharp your arguments are, the conversation will remain nothing more than a clash between two defensive egos. The first question in the Socratic method, what would someone who disagrees say, is a quiet yet powerful invitation. It asks you to walk to the other side of that hill. It doesn't demand that you agree or surrender your viewpoint. It only asks that for a brief moment you describe the opposing view fairly, truthfully, and without distortion. Because only when you can articulate the opposing idea using the very words that person would use, have you truly stepped out of the role of the reactor and into the position of the understanding mind. Sadly, most of us don't argue to understand, we argue to win. And so, we rush to label others. They're biased, they're stubborn, they don't get it. But if you cannot accurately and honestly represent the argument of your opponent, then the truth is this: you don't yet understand the issue, you're merely repeating what you want to hear. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once reminded us, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. If you truly want to have a real conversation, begin by listening deeply enough that you could repeat what the other person would say, even if you still don't agree inside. Because asking this question is, in itself, a way of softening the ego before stepping onto the ground of reason. It is a quiet yet courageous act, an unspoken way of saying, I'm not here to refute, I'm here to understand. And only when you understand does your word carry weight, not because you hold the truth, but because you speak from a place of fairness. Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? This quote from Marcus Aurelius, Stoic philosopher and Roman emperor, reminds us that before judging others, we must pause and look within ourselves. Often, what irritates us in others is merely a reflection of the weaknesses we have not yet accepted within. When you criticize someone for being impatient, perhaps you are still wrestling with your own temper. When you think someone is fake, perhaps you too are wearing a mask before the world. Marcus Aurelius didn't teach weak endurance. He taught dual awareness, to observe both others' actions and your own reactions at once. For when you recognize your own imperfection, criticism turns into understanding, and anger transforms into wisdom. The power of this question doesn't make you weaker, it makes you larger. It allows you to rise from the safety of your own position and step briefly into someone else's world. And at that very moment, when you can describe the world through the language of those who oppose you, you not only deepen your thinking, but also create a space where people can finally lay down their weapons and begin to listen. So next time you feel a storm rising inside, pause. Ask yourself, if I were the one who disagreed with me, what would I say? That's not just a question. It's a doorway to wisdom. And sometimes it's also the path that leads you back to the peace you've long been searching for, within your own voice. Question 2. What are you assuming? But to truly understand the reasoning of both sides, you need to look deeper into the very foundation of your own viewpoint. And that's where the second question appears. Sometimes what drives a person into panic isn't the reality of their situation, but what they believe will happen. Invisible assumptions that carry far more destructive power than any external event. A person who has never failed may still live in fear that if failure ever comes, their entire worth will collapse. Someone who has never been rejected may still believe that one moment of disagreement means they are no longer lovable. And so, they don't just live in reality. They live within a dense layer of imagined fears they themselves have created. We all move through life with hundreds of invisible assumptions like these. No one taught us to believe in them. We simply inherited them early on. Being good earns love. Success means wealth. If no one helps me, I must not deserve it. These assumptions, seemingly harmless, quietly shape our decisions, emotions, reactions, and, more profoundly, the way we define who we are. That's why the question, "What are you assuming?" isn't merely a clever tool for debate. It's a way to peel back the intellectual mask and reach the silent roots of thought. It doesn't wound, but it also spares nothing. It doesn't attack arguments on the surface. It digs quietly into the foundation beneath them, the very place where everything begins. And if that foundation is built on fear, vague beliefs, or untested conventions, then the entire structure, no matter how sophisticated, can crumble with a single touch of truth. Jim was a software engineer who switched careers into product design. During his first few months in the new role, he constantly doubted himself every time he submitted a design. He silently compared himself to colleagues with 10 years of experience, thinking he wasn't good enough because he still asked questions, still made revisions, still felt uncertain about the details. In his mind, one unspoken assumption governed everything. Only those who excel from the start deserve to be here. Then, during a group feedback session, someone asked him, "Compared to whom do you think you're not good enough? What standard are you using to measure your worth? Are you sure others haven't been through what you're feeling right now?" Those questions didn't embarrass Jim. On the contrary, They helped him realize that he had been living under the pressure of an imaginary standard, an outdated belief that personal value comes from perfection. From that moment, Jim began seeing himself more fairly. He stopped treating every mistake as a verdict and began to see them as essential steps in becoming a steadier version of himself. When someone says, "I'm not good enough for this job," the right question isn't, "Is that true?" but rather, "Compared to whom? By what standard? Why do you believe that standard applies to everyone?" These questions aren't meant to prove anyone wrong. They open the door for self-reflection. They reveal that maybe the person is assuming only perfect people have worth, that mistakes are unforgivable, that everything must be right the first time. And if those assumptions are false, then their fears might not be real either. When you pause to ask yourself, "What am I assuming?" you are doing something greater than analyzing logic. You are separating belief from reality, memory from the present, the inner voice from what is actually happening. The philosopher Epictetus, who once lived as a slave before becoming one of the masters of Stoicism, taught, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." What torments people is not the event itself, but their interpretation of it. When you assume the worst, you start living as if it has already happened. Even when no one has said anything, nothing has occurred, and no one has truly rejected you. The tragedy is that the pain you feel doesn't come from the world outside, but from the unexamined voice within. The question, "What are you assuming?" doesn't make you a skeptic. It makes you responsible for your own thinking. It demands courage, the courage to admit that you may have been living too long inside a version of the truth no one, not even you, has ever questioned. And when you are lucid enough to ask that question of others and of yourself, sometimes you don't just rescue a flawed argument. You may very well free your entire life from the weight of what seemed like fate, but was, in fact, nothing more than a chain of untested assumptions. 3. Question 3. What evidence would change your mind? Imagine you're rowing alone through a dense sea of fog. Your visibility is so limited that you can only rely on the old map inside your head, the one you think you've studied well, the one you're sure is right. Each stroke of the oar feels confident, each decision a silent declaration that you're heading the right way. But then, someone hands you a compass, and its needle points in the exact opposite direction. Would you stop to check? Or would you keep rowing? Not because you're sure you're right, but because turning back would mean admitting you've been wrong the whole way. It's in moments like this that the question, "What evidence would change your mind?" arrives, not as a challenge, but as a quiet reminder, a pause of reason amidst the noise of your inner convictions. It doesn't try to expose who's right or wrong. It simply reflects back. Are you genuinely seeking truth, or are you just protecting an outdated version of yourself? In any discussion, the truly open-minded person isn't the one who knows the most, speaks the best, or argues the sharpest. It's the one who can gently pause and honestly say, "Here's what could make me change my mind." But if when asked, "What would change your mind?" your answer is nothing, then reason has already left the room. What remains is the hardened shell of an ego terrified of cracking. It's easy to make bold claims like cryptocurrency is a scam or people like that can't be trusted. But if someone asks, not to challenge you, but to invite reflection, so what would make you reconsider that belief? most of us would hesitate. Not because we lack information, but because we never intended to open our minds. We didn't come to understand, we came to win. Worse still, we often build impossible standards of proof, as if we'd only accept the truth if it were confirmed by a divine being. This is a classic fallacy called moving the goalposts. Every time new evidence appears, we shift the standard just to avoid confronting what we don't want to believe. Or we selectively trust only familiar sources, no matter how biased, as long as they make us feel safe inside our old beliefs. The Stoics understood, truth belongs to no one. It has no side, needs no defense. It stands alone, and only those brave enough to approach it can touch it. The story of Cleanthes, one of Zeno's successors, the founder of Stoicism, is a vivid example. Though once a strong boxer, Cleanthes lived in poverty and worked through the night to afford his philosophy studies by day. When mocked by friends for pursuing wisdom while still carrying buckets for a living, he simply replied, "Better to be humbled by truth than to be imprisoned by the pride of ignorance." To him, learning meant accepting the possibility of being wrong, not to feel ashamed, but to begin truly growing. And in a world where everyone already has an opinion to defend, the person who can quietly say, "This is the kind of evidence that would change my mind," is not just wise, they are mature, because they are willing to learn, willing to discover where their limits begin, willing to admit they may have been wrong, not to feel small, but to live more honestly. Asking this question doesn't make you weak. On the contrary, it's a mark of inner strength, the kind of mind that can stand firm even after acknowledging its own mistakes. So next time you find yourself caught in an argument, whether with others or with yourself, pause for a moment and ask, if I'm wrong, what evidence would change my mind? If you can answer that, you're not just becoming wiser, you're becoming humbler, and that humility is the most reliable foundation for a truly mature mind. Question 4. What would happen if everyone thought like you? If the third question tests our willingness to open up to the truth, then the fourth expands our perspective, forcing us not only to think for ourselves, but to imagine the consequences if the entire world behaved exactly as we do. Have you ever seen someone, or yourself, justify a wrongful action with reasons that sound perfectly reasonable? I'm only telling a small lie to keep the peace. I don't need to try hard, because everyone cheats anyway. But then, if you pause and ask, what would happen if everyone thought like you? The picture changes instantly. It is no longer a personal choice, but a thought-provoking projection of the future of an entire community. This question is a silent yet weighty moral test. It doesn't condemn the speaker. It invites them to carry their reasoning to its ultimate consequences. If everyone believed that a little lie is harmless, who would dare trust a promise? If everyone made excuses to cheat, who would still uphold trust in fairness, in truth, in sincere effort? The problem does not lie in a single act, but in the principle silently standing behind it. The very thing which, if scaled and repeated by millions of people using the same rationale, would gradually erode the values we rely on to exist: trust, order, integrity, and faith in what is good. Stoic philosophy calls this the universality of reason. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings no benefit to the bee." We may think we are exceptions, that our small actions are too insignificant to affect the larger picture. But a society cannot survive on a long chain of exceptions. If everyone makes excuses to preserve their personal privileges, the things we call shared values will soon rot from within, not because of any external enemy, but because of the rationalizations of those who once believed they didn't count toward the whole. The deeper reason this question is so powerful is that it can expose rationalizations that appear principled but are, in truth, selfishness disguised as logic. When someone says, "I'm not doing anything wrong because everyone does it," the next question should not be, "Where are they wrong?" but "If everyone thought like you, who would begin to change?" And if you do not dare to be the first, then in reality you are relying on others to keep the world from collapsing, while quietly withdrawing your own hand from responsibility. A lyric from Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror once said, "If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change." We want a better world, but we want others to start first. We hope for justice, yet keep a little cheating for ourselves. We long for truth, yet easily rationalize small lies because it's convenient. And here is the crux. If your way of living cannot be universalized without leading to chaos, then it is not a principle. It is a privilege. And privilege, no matter how nobly justified, will sooner or later lead to injustice. The question, "What would happen if everyone thought like you?" wakes us from the self-justifications that have become habit. It forces us, even if only for a moment, not just to look at the individual action, but at the chain reaction behind it. Such thinking not only makes us more mature in dialogue, but it also makes us more responsible in the smallest details of daily life. Therefore, before you justify a personal choice with a reason that sounds reasonable, pause. Ask yourself, not in a scolding tone, but with courageous honesty, if this society were made up of people like me, thinking this way, acting this way, what would that world look like? And if the answer makes you uneasy, that is not a verdict. It is an invitation to live differently, not because you are forced to change, but because you deserve a version of yourself that can be universalized, one that brings good not only to you, but to everyone. 5. Question 5. How do you know that's true? Sometimes a short and calm question can awaken more powerfully than any rebuttal. When someone confidently asserts, "Social media is destroying the world," "Today's younger generation is weaker," or "Money is the only thing that brings happiness," your gentle reply, "How do you know that's true?" can leave them speechless, not because they are entirely wrong, but because they have never paused to truly verify. Most of what we are certain of does not come from direct experience, but from countless repetitions in conversations on social media, from elders, from the crowd. These truths seep into us like air. We inhale them, retain them, and live by them without ever questioning. They become silent foundations for our judgments, emotions, and even major decisions, although we do not know whether they are truly sound. That is why the question, "How do you know that's true?" in the Socratic method is not an attack, but a beam of light. It doesn't wound, it doesn't destroy by force. It simply illuminates. And when that light touches them, many truths, once thought solid, turn out to be shadows of repetition, of defensive habit, of fear of change. The things we assumed were foundations turn out to have no footing at all. This question forces us to face the three pillars that any solid framework of thought requires: origin, reliability, and method of verification. When you assert, "I'm certain this is true," but cannot state the data, have no independent sources, and no clear means of verification, what you hold is not knowledge but an untested belief. That is not necessarily wrong, but it is not necessarily right either. In psychology, this phenomenon is called the illusion of explanatory depth, the illusion that we understand something more deeply than we actually do. Research from Yale University, 2015, shows that when participants were asked to explain in detail a view they thought they understood, such as why real estate prices always rise, their confidence dropped by nearly half after realizing they did not truly understand. It was precisely the question, "How do you know that's true?" that returned them to a state of intellectual humility, the starting point of real thinking. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, once wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." That spirit is the soul of this question. It does not aim to refute others, but to help them shine a light on what they have never questioned. It does not make you weak. It compels you to be courageous, to admit that beliefs too must be tested like any truth. Therefore, before you continue to defend to the end a viewpoint, a prejudice, or a seemingly unshakable truth, pause for a beat and ask yourself, "How do I know that's true?" If you cannot answer immediately, do not panic. Perhaps that is not a sign of weakness, but the first step on the journey of someone daring to live with the truth. 6. Advanced tactics. After mastering the 5 core questions, the next step is learning how to use them with flexibility, subtlety, and strategy. This is where the advanced tactics of the Socratic method truly show their power. Philosophy doesn't live only in the questions we ask, but in how we ask them, and even deeper, in the silence we create after asking a question that is genuine, sharp, and humble enough to shake the very roots of what someone believes they know. What makes the Socratic method transcend ordinary debate is its ability to guide others back to themselves, to that inner space where there's nowhere left to hide, no one left to blame, and nothing left to cling to except the truth. Tactic 1 is the most subtle yet powerful of all: strategic silence. After you ask a question like, "What assumption are you making here?" stop. Don't rush to fill the space with logic, with examples, or with the desire to help them conclude. Step back and let the silence do its work. In that pause, if your question was genuine enough, it will echo in the listener's mind like a bell. Because when there is no more external noise to cling to, people are forced to listen inward. And sometimes it is in silence that the truest answers rise, like a drop of light piercing through the fog of unexamined belief. Tactic 2 is the clarity loop, not to expose flaws, but to lead the speaker to uncover the unlit gaps in their own thinking. Questions like, "Could you clarify that?" or "Can you explain that part a bit more?" may sound gentle, but they act like a mirror, reflecting their reasoning back to them layer by layer, until they suddenly realize they've never thought that deeply before. Many people believe they understand what they believe, until they try to articulate it. And at that moment, the vagueness, the contradictions, and the loose ends begin to appear like cracks that can no longer be hidden. One of the most illuminating techniques is to trap with reality. When someone makes a bold statement like, "No one becomes successful without cheating," you don't need to argue. Simply ask, "Could you give me a specific, verifiable example of that?" It sounds light, but that single question creates a quiet space where emotion no longer shields reason. Arguments repeated by habit, if not backed by real data, collapse quietly under their own weight. What cannot be grounded in experience is often just a shadow of bias or fear. Once Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." That is why asking for concrete examples is a direct test against the so-called truth of the crowd, the kind of belief that, if left untouched, spreads and blinds an entire generation. Finally, tactic 3 is testing for consistency. Ask, "Earlier you said A, but now you're saying B. How do these 2 points align?" The goal isn't to corner anyone, but to bring them back to the logical structure of their own reasoning. When someone claims to believe in absolute freedom, yet supports total control, that question shines a light on the contradiction they don't want to see. All these tactics, from silence to clarity loops, to demands for examples, to consistency checks, are not meant to expose others, but to help them expose themselves to themselves. This isn't arguing to win, it's guiding others to the very edge of what they believe, then letting them either step forward or return with deeper understanding. Above all, these tactics demand that you, the questioner, live truthfully in what you seek. No control, no mockery, no breaking others down, only patience, steadiness, and the willingness to place truth above ego. So remember, not every question needs words. Sometimes, if you are calm enough to hear the answer emerging from silence, even the most stubborn beliefs begin to dissolve. And there, truth can finally step in. Which of these 3 tactics do you think could apply to your own life? Share your thoughts with us. 7. The art of defense. Mastering how to ask the 5 questions is only the beginning. The next step is not just asking correctly, but guiding the dialogue in a way that reaches genuine depth and transformation. Not everyone who questions you intends to attack. Not every challenge is a disguised assault. Sometimes behind a simple question lies a quiet invitation, an invitation to look again at what you believe, not to deny it, but to understand it more deeply. Yet when you're the one being questioned, when the Socratic questions come your way, gentle as a breeze yet sharp enough to touch the deepest roots of your convictions, your first reaction, like most people's, is rarely to listen. It's to defend, to argue, to feel confused, even angry. But in those moments, the true art of defense doesn't lie in sharp reasoning or skillful rhetoric. It lies in inner calm, in allowing yourself not to know all the answers, yet still standing with maturity, honesty, and courage. Because real maturity doesn't come from being right every minute, but from daring to be the one seeking truth, not the one guarding pride. Imagine you're in a tense team meeting and a colleague suddenly challenges your proposal. Are we sure this approach won't slow down the overall progress? Your instinct might be to defend, to argue, to prove, even to reject. But instead of pushing the conversation into conflict, you can pause, breathe slowly, and reply gently. "That's a good question. What's your take on it?" A single sentence like that can shift the entire atmosphere from tension to openness. No more walls, no more fortresses of opinion. By beginning with intellectual humility, you send a signal. I'm not here to win. I'm here to understand. And in that calm exchange, the conversation grows deeper, kinder, where both sides have a chance to reflect and learn from each other rather than trying to defeat one another. Still, remember, reason is not always the right response. When the person you're speaking to is hurt, angry, or emotionally fragile, even the best question can sound cold or detached. At such times, silent listening, without analysis or judgment, becomes the highest form of understanding. Understanding not with the mind, but with the heart. Likewise, in contexts prone to misunderstanding, with superiors, teachers, or layered relationships, direct counterarguments might close doors for future dialogue. Step back wisely. I understand your point. I'd like to take some time to reflect before responding. Slowing down is not avoidance. It's creating space for thought to ripen, for clarity to deepen, rather than reacting impulsively and missing the essence. And when you are ready, you can re-enter the dialogue with clear intention. If someone asks, "How do you know that's true?" instead of instantly offering sources or reasoning, you might respond, "Are you asking for the data I used or the reasoning I followed to get there?" A question like this not only keeps the structure of the dialogue balanced, but also shows respect for both sides' thought processes. Once you've explained your view, you can also gently turn the mirror. You've asked about my assumptions. In your perspective, what's the foundation of yours? Not as a counterattack, but as an invitation to fairness. Because a true dialogue isn't an interrogation, it's a shared journey of illumination. In the song Demons by Imagine Dragons, there's a line that makes listeners pause. "Don't get too close. It's dark inside. It's where my demons hide." Many people avoid questions not because they lack logic, but because their beliefs are protecting wounds not yet healed. And as the one being questioned, you too must find the courage to look into those shadows, not to be exposed, but to step into the light on your own terms. The art of defense isn't about winning an argument. It's about maintaining dignity amid scrutiny, not shrinking, not avoiding, and not striking back. Just being calm, sincere, and always willing to learn. Because sometimes the strongest person in a conversation isn't the one who asks the most questions, but the one who can smile, look inward, and say, "That's a good question. I'll think about it. Thank you." 8. Practical applications in life. After mastering the 5 core questions, it's time to move into the advanced stage, where you learn to apply them as an art, to protect yourself from manipulation, to stay rational during conflict, and to use them fluidly in everyday situations. Most mistakes in life, most unnecessary pain, and many quiet, lingering conflicts don't come from malice. They arise from moments when we act too quickly, react instinctively, or simply fail to pause and ask the right question. In those seconds when emotion flares like fire, we forget that one deep breath, one thoughtful question, can calm the storm rising in another person and within ourselves. The Socratic method at first glance may seem like something reserved for philosophers or academic debates, but in truth, it is an inner compass, a survival tool for ordinary life. When applied with kindness and tact, these brief questions not only clarify truth, but can also save a fragile relationship, bring reason back into a heated meeting, or gently guide someone home to themselves. In work, when faced with an unconvincing proposal, instead of dismissing it outright, you could ask, if we do the opposite, what might go wrong? That question isn't just a test of logic, it's an invitation for the other person to re-examine their belief from another angle. When everyone feels heard with respect, responsibility stops being a personal burden and becomes a shared effort, where reason, not ego, leads the way. In sales, rather than rushing to emphasize benefits, you could pause and ask, if nothing changes, where will you be in 6 months? You're not creating pressure, you're creating awareness. You're not selling a solution, you're helping them see the cost of inaction. And from that awareness, the desire for change grows naturally, without force. With children or students, instead of scolding or commanding, try asking, what do you think will happen if you do this again? Such a question activates causal thinking more deeply than any lecture could. When a child learns to ask themselves, they don't just learn responsibility, they learn to listen to their own conscience. That's the beginning of morality, not imposed from outside but born from within. In love, when all logic has failed and right and wrong blur beneath hurt feelings, return to honesty and ask, what makes you feel heard right now? A question like that, spoken at the right moment, can save a conversation on the brink of collapse. Because in intimate connections, people don't need logic. They need to be seen, to be touched by unguarded sincerity. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. And the questions you ask throughout your day, however small or silent, are unspoken declarations of the direction you've chosen. No need for noise or argument, only honesty." So, bring the Socratic method into your life, not to win debates, but to rebuild conversations that have long lost their authenticity, to illuminate the hazy beliefs we've been leaning on, and to give everyone involved a chance to see themselves more clearly. Starting today, before you react, ask. Before you conclude, clarify. Before you persuade, listen. Because sometimes the right question, asked at the right moment, can not only save a conversation, it can save you from the next wrong move you didn't even know you were about to make. And in a world full of noise, the one who knows how to ask the right questions is the one who lights up the quiet places of life, where truth, maturity, and peace are born. Throughout this journey, we've explored the quiet, yet profound power of asking the right question at the right time. In work, in love, in teaching, or in the inner life, the Socratic method helps us see not only logic more clearly, but ourselves, so that our actions arise not from impulse, but from understanding. A single right question can save a meeting, preserve a relationship, guide a child, and, most importantly, awaken a mind living on autopilot. So, what about you? Which of these questions made you pause and think? What changed within you through this journey? If you found value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with Stoic philosophy. And don't forget to watch the videos appearing at the end of the screen, where each lesson takes you one step deeper into yourself.